With Baldur's Gate 3 around the horizon to release and actually be playable for the full game, which companion should you take with you to form your party? Now, before I get into that, I just want to be very clear on something. This is my opinion. You don't have to agree, and how you choose to play the game is completely up to you. Also, I will be including spoilers, so if you're not interested in spoilers, don't watch. Just skip this video for now until it goes live. With that being said, you've been warned, so let's get into it. I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons since the early 90s. Started out as a Dungeon Master with the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition. I've played multiple pen and paper versions and a couple of the game ones, but this is not my only hobby, so my opinion is just opinion based on somebody who does this for fun on the side. It's not like I'm a hardcore D&D guy. I just love Dungeons & Dragons. And one of the things that I love about Dungeons & Dragons is the fact that there are so many options and customization you can do. So what Larian Studio is bringing with Baldur's Gate 3 has got me super excited. I, of course, pre-ordered it. I've been playing the early access for maybe about 100 hours or so, and it's just fascinating to me, all the different types of characters you can build and the interactions you can have with these characters. I wish you could experiment with all the companions that you can eventually get, but unfortunately you're limited to a small number of them. And I will be warning you now, there are some characters I do not like at all, but that's fine. It is what it is, and it gives you options, which I think is a key to enjoying Dungeons & Dragons. So something to keep in mind as I'm going through these characters, aside from the fact that this is all opinion-based, is you do not have to take all these characters with you. You don't have to have all the companions out there. You don't have to do all the stories. And maybe you want to do a few playthroughs where you only have a few. Maybe you do a few playthroughs with all of them. One thing I've noticed is choices you make can piss off the companions. And it's possible they might leave your party based upon choices you make. So it could be that Larian Studio is trying to force you into choosing the type of character you want to play and the type of playthrough you want to experience. So something I plan to do is play through it multiple times with different characters. So even though I'm normally a dungeon master in most cases when I'm playing the pen and paper version, when I'm playing the video game, I have to choose. So usually, and I can do another video about this in detail, I will pick a druid, sometimes a wizard, or a monk. Those are my three favorite classes. And typically I like a human, a dwarf, or surprisingly I actually like half drow. Even though drow are typically and traditionally evil, something about playing a half drow is kind of fun too. So for my first playthrough, it's going to have to be a druid because I love the character that much. So when I'm building my party, I want to think around what's going to fit me roleplay wise and which characters I personally like. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about this. Now, the first thing to keep in mind is this is going to happen in the Forgotten Realms world. So I'm going to think about my druid, building them as if they exist in that Aberturel, the Forgotten Realms Earth, basically. And there is, of course, I believe the game is happening in Faerun. So that's stuff I'm going to keep in mind when I'm trying to play this. If you want to know more about druids, again, we can do this in future videos. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but that's the approach and the mindset I'm going for when I'm choosing whether or not to pick a character. So let's start out with the first character based upon Baldur's Gate 3's website, and that's Astarion. Now, Astarion here is a high elf rogue, and he is here's the spoiler, he is a vampire. I guess he's technically a vampire spawn, but because of the stuff that happens in the very beginning of the game, and if you do not realize that these characters have tadpoles in their brain, I don't know where you've been, you definitely haven't played early access. So with Astarion, you would probably want to pick him for a party that is going to be chaotic. Now, they don't seem to use alignments anymore in 5e. I've always had alignments. It's kind of weird. So I guess the whole good evil thing is kind of out the window. But if you want to go with the old alignment system, because that's what I'm comfortable with and familiar with, Astarion is very chaotic evil, kind of like definitely on the evil side. He does things for himself. He wants to be happy. He wants to empower himself, and he wants to do things mostly for selfish reasons, anything that's going to make him happy. That's pretty typical of the character. Now, all of the characters are voice acted well, so I'm not going to mention their voice acting at all because I think all of them are phenomenal, stellar jobs. Great job there that Larian did in casting these characters. But for Astarion, I feel like you would want to pick him if you need a rogue, stealthy, lock-picking, silent type of character. So you could play a different approach to combat where you're being stealthy and hitting things from afar. You could also might need someone to pick locks and open doors for you. Maybe you want to go with that sneaky, stealthy, stealing kind of route. Would be a great party member. For me, for my first playthrough, for my human druid, not going to go with the vampire at all. In fact, I'm probably just going to tell him to F off, not let him join my party. Now, some people might be surprised by this choice, but again, you can play this however you want. So even if I do pick him up and learn a little bit about his story, I'm probably going to piss him off with most of my choices, and he's definitely not going to be in my core party. With that in mind, again, it is just an opinion, but that's my thoughts on Astarion so far. I definitely think he's going to make for an interesting character dynamic with your player, and I will say for future playthroughs where I am playing more evil characters, because sometimes I might play a drow character or a dwarf character, maybe something that's going to be on the darker side. And when I say dwarf, I'm talking about the Underdark dwarves. The drow, which of course are from the Underdark, or even the half-drow might have Astarion with them, potentially. We'll see. Or if I just play an evil character in general, I think he's going to make a good asset to the team, just not for my first playthrough. That's pretty much all I have to say about Astarion. Like I said, I'm not going to pick him the first time through, and it's just something to keep in mind if you want to pick him or not. I will say one more spoiler, and I'm warning you this is a spoiler. Apparently, there is a time when you find out he is a vampire, and he does try to bite you. So you have the option of letting him bite you, and it looks like from some of the cinematics you can find online that you do in fact turn into a vampire. Something about the tadpole takes him from being a spawn to an actual vampire. Now in D&D, vampires actually can't stand in running water. It damages them. I don't think they can even cross it technically, and the sunlight will hurt them. But Astarion can actually walk out in the sun, probably something to do with the tadpole, so he might be a more powerful vampire than you traditionally see in Forgotten Realms in general. I also am kind of curious that if you do get bitten by him and you become a vampire, will you get vampire power sets? So that might make for an interesting playstyle for those of you interested. Moving on. Shadowheart. Shadowheart seems to be a fan favorite for many people. I actually have very mixed feelings about Shadowheart. Mostly, I don't like the character, and I definitely will not be using her for my first playthrough, and I'll explain why in just a moment. Now, for future playthroughs, she might make for a very interesting character dynamic, and the character does seem to be likable and very charismatic. It's one of the few characters, especially in the early access, that seems like a character that is likable. She is actually a half-elf, even though it says high half-elf, so I guess it would be a high elf, half-elf, because you always have a second half. If you're half-elf, you can be half wood elf, half high elf, or half drow. Kind of cool that Larian gives you so many options. But she's a cleric of the Trickery domain, and her deity is Shar. This is where I have no interest in the character. I don't want her in my party, and she pisses me off. And I mainly say this because I don't think it's going to fit with a Druid character either. Those of you not very familiar with Forgotten Realm lore, you basically have this main creator deity called Ao, and Lord Ao basically created everything. And the first two beings he creates are two goddesses. Selûne, who is a goddess of light, lady of the moon, and her sister, Shar. Shar is like the epitome of evilness in this realm. And you basically had these two deities creating all these different realms and all these different planets, and they decided to create Aberturel. Aberturel is basically the planet that you're on in Forgotten Realms. So apparently Baldur's Gate 3 takes place in Faerûn, and you go, of course, with Baldur's Gate, and there's different places like Waterdeep, which has been in different games. So it's definitely the Forgotten Realms world. Aberturel, when it was created, both Shar and Selûne basically created the first goddess, which was Chauntea. Chauntea is pretty much like a mother nature, the great mother of Aberturel. She wanted to create life. She couldn't do it with just starlight and darkness. So she asked the goddesses, Shar and Selûne, to give her a light source so that she could nurture life on the planet. Well, Selûne defies her sister, sets a planet on fire, and creates a star that will cast light onto Aberturel so that she can start creating life, and different deities like Sylvanas, Myliki, different nature deities, and creating nature itself. So typically a druid is going to draw its powers from nature or from one of these nature-based deities. There's an option for any of the Dungeons & Dragons, Forgotten Realms, 2nd edition, all that stuff. There's options here. So with that in mind, to me, a cleric of Shar who wanted not to give light and then gets pissed at Selûne and attacks her sister to fight with her to destroy the star and crush out life on Aberturel. Selûne throws her mystical energy at her sister, and it rips her mystical energy out of her and creates a new goddess, Mistral, the goddess of magic, who dies, and then there's another one who also dies. Long story there, completely separate video. But basically, Shar does not like the sun or star, or what I guess it would be a star in this world, over Abitrell, she doesn't want life, and she goes after attacking people with her twisted ways. So she's like I said, she's like the epitome of the most evil being, in my opinion, in Forgotten Realms. And definitely in opposition to Chantia, who teams up with Saloon, who actually helped her to create life. So a druid, in my opinion, would be against Shar. That reason alone makes me not want to have her part of my party. And the fact that she follows Shar is in my opinion, kind of a blind zealot. The way she is in the game, she seems super sweet and nice, and she's actually approves of all good things that you do. And she also has no memory. So it's like, okay, if she has no memory, and she's a cleric, and she likes helping people, maybe you might be okay with having Shadowheart with you, and I'm sure a lot of people will. But I don't know. Maybe I'll keep her in my party until she officially says she's a cleric of Shar, and then I kick her out of my party at that point. I don't know how I'm going to handle it, because there's definitely a lot of options, but I think for my first playthrough, I probably won't use her. However, she is a cleric. She does have the clerical powers of a deity behind her. She does have the different abilities, such as healing, and she does seem to be a pretty good character. So on a whole, maybe you can convert her and make her realize how bad Shar is. I don't know what that'll do to her power set, but she is definitely going to fit any party that needs a healer. Clerics are fairly on the tankier side too, so she's definitely a good utility character and healing character. Now, one thing I will point out about healing in general when it comes to Dungeons & Dragons, especially 5e, I advise against trying to out-heal damage. It is better to eliminate your enemies and use your healing stuff outside of combat. The exception to this, of course, is if you're using something like Healing Word, where you can raise them from a distance, which Shadowheart will have. Now, as a druid, I'm going to have Healing Word. I'm also going to have Goodberry to use outside of combat. I also am going to have Guidance, which is a great cantrip to use to help with your rolls. So I don't know if I necessarily need her on my party at all. However, she is someone that I will have in one of my playthroughs for sure. I just don't think she's going to fit for my first playthrough. So those would be reasons to consider her. Now, the next character I want to talk about is Gale. So Gale is a human wizard. Gale, when I first met him, he was definitely probably one of my first early access characters. I like how witty he is. He's comical. And with him being a wizard, with you getting to choose what his mastery is, his school of magic that he's going to fit into. Now, in early access, you only had two options. You had evocation and you had abjuration. So basically a protection or offensive. I usually went with the offensive route with him. And it is really cool to have a wizard. It's one of my 3 favorite classes. So I do like the character. I think he's comical, so he is kind of neat. And I do think he's going to fit in most parties. Unless you're a wizard or some sort of a blaster caster type of a class, we're talking warlocks, we're talking wizards, we're talking sorcerers. And technically, to a lesser degree, you can make like an Eldritch Knight fighter. It has some, but not as much as these 3 casting classes. So it is nice to have one. The fact that they can write any spell into their spellbook and learn any scroll into a permanent spell is phenomenal. I think they're eventually going to nerf that and take away cleric spells, so they can't write cleric spells in their spellbooks, but I don't know. As of right now, in early access, you were able to write cleric spells in your spellbook as well as a wizard. So definitely a powerful character, comical and charming character, but I don't know. There's some iffiness about him, and again, spoiler alert, you will find out later there's something going on with him that he has to consume magical items. So you will be losing magical items having him in your party. One of the reasons I'm considering not having him in my party is because I don't want to lose magical items. Then I found out that apparently online, some of the people that were playing a little bit longer that played beyond early access found out that he will take care of things himself in a way you might not approve. So that kind of also makes me wonder if I like the character. Now, from a roleplay perspective, though, I feel like my druid, after meeting him, would want him to be part of the party at first, and then maybe change the mind later. So Gale is someone that I'm at least considering bringing along. Even if he's not part of my core team, I might consider having him along, not only to learn his story, but yeah, he might fit with the type of play style I want to start with. Moving on to the next one, we're now facing the fighter, Lizelle. Now, Lizelle is a Githyanki. If you don't know much about the Githyanki, basically the Gith are from the astral plane, and they were slaves to Mind Flayers, so they have a grudge against Mind Flayers. So that's going to fit really well with the story. She's abrasive. 100% she's abrasive. I've got mixed feelings about her. She is a fighter, and she's got an attitude, and she has a superiority complex. She's very condescending. She cuts you down a lot. She thinks she knows the best of everything. She thinks she's always right, and everyone's inferior to her. So with that, she kind of pisses me off most of the time, but it's almost in a charming way. When I do play through again, especially if I end up playing an Eldritch Knight Drow, which I do plan on doing a playthrough eventually as, I think I would definitely have her on the party, even though it's also another fighter. There's something that's kind of cool about her to a certain degree, so I have mixed of feelings. But if you need a frontline fighter, you need someone who's tanky, someone to deal out damage, you could take her instead of an Eldritch Knight. You can make her a Battle Master. I think there'll be more subclasses when the game releases. She's definitely someone to consider having on your team for that purpose, especially if you're not a fighter or a barbarian or you don't have one of those on your team. She would fill that frontline fighter role exceptionally well. She starts out with really good armor too. Now, I did find out that you can be horribly bad. I saw someone else do this and I tried it. In the tutorial in the beginning, you can actually eliminate her character at the beginning, take all of her armor and gear, and then just go through the rest of the beginning, and she's just not part of your party and she's dead. So that's kind of interesting that they give you that option. At one time, apparently, you could take gear off of the people in the tutorial section, and then you could throw her off the ship. In this case, you can actually just attack any of the characters and strip their gear. That's not going to fit for my Druid character. It's not something I'm going to do with my first playthrough. But the fact that that option's in the game is, I like that. I like that ability to make that choice. But yes, with the Githyanki, I don't know. We're talking about a creature from another plane. We're talking about a Druid who's concerned about Abertrel and the wilderness and the wild. I don't know if a Githyanki is going to fit that very well. But still an interesting character, and I think I'm kind of on the fence about her as a whole. She seems like a condescending bitch. She really does. All right, next character on the list, Will. Will is one of those characters. He's a human warlock, and he has the subclass of the Fiend. The fact that it's a Fiend, I'm not really a huge fan of the Nine Hells, okay? So any of the demon stuff in the game, I'm just not a fan of personally. So I really don't like the fact he has a pact with a Fiend. Like, if it was like an Archfey or something, that might fit with my Druid party. So already the fact that he's a Warlock alone and with a Fiend on top of it, I don't think I'm going to have him on my first playthrough for that reason alone. Now, he is a good character, so he would fit my party to a certain degree. So maybe both Gale and Will can join me until I'm able to pick the characters I really want on my team. I'm not that interested in his backstory. The character seems mildly boring to me, and he's just kind of out of left field. Already giving himself a nickname. He's kind of like a goody-goody two-shoes to the extreme. I don't know how I feel about him. With that being said, opinion aside, we're talking about a Warlock character here. That means you can both cast spells and do physical strikes. And let's face it, Warlocks have one of the better cantrips in the game with Eldritch Blast. It's super powerful. It can be used as many times as you want because it's a cantrip. And it definitely gives some interesting dynamic to not have to prepare your spells like a wizard. So you'll be limited on your spells, but I mean, you can use some weapons on there as well. So the Warlock's kind of definitely an interesting character. But again, depending on what you're playing, you might not necessarily need that role. And to me, Warlock feels more niche. I feel like Cleric and Wizard, those base classes, including some sort of a tanky barbarian, paladin, fighter type of a character, is usually enough to build your party with. But I don't know. It's something to consider. I just don't see Will on many of the playthroughs that I will do, unless I eventually just want to see what his backstory is like. But as of right now, Will's kind of not on the list. Kind of just indifferent about him. Then we have Karlach. So Karlach is an Asmodeus Tiefling. So Tieflings are basically children of humans mixed with one of multiple types of demons, or they're descended from people who made pacts with demons in the Forgotten Realms. So there's different ways of why Tieflings exist. I'm not sure what they're going with or what her particular backstory is. She is a barbarian. So she is a nice alternative to Lysel if you need a frontline fighter of some form. Right now in early access, you can't really use her. You just meet her. She can't join your team or anything. I don't like Tieflings. And apparently people have a problem with this. I don't care. I'm going to play how I want to play, just like you should play how you want to play. So I have no plans on having her on my team. Would I consider having her on my team? Possibly. Would it work for a Druid? I don't know. On one hand, I feel like a Druids would not like anything from the Nine Hells, and the fact that she has blood from the Nine Hells, regardless of what her background is or how she got that, I feel like that would be unnatural and against the natural world, so I don't think that would fit with a Druid. Maybe it would. Maybe I'm wrong. And it doesn't matter. You can play how you want, even if it doesn't fit your character for roleplay purposes. It's a game. Have fun. But I don't know. I'm also not a huge fan of the class Barbarian. So unless she's like an extremely charming, charismatic character that I really get into, and I'm like, you know what, I want her on my party, have her in the front line instead of Lysel, I'm probably going to have to pass on her. So I probably won't use her. Now, in future playthroughs, I could see her fitting future playthroughs depending on what I decide to play as in my future playthroughs. But for the human druid or even the half-drow druid, she's probably going to be a pass as well. So, and as I'd mentioned with tieflings, you know, they're basically, they were humans and they were either plane touched, they're outsiders, you know, they have this fiendish plane integration based upon different types of demons, which gives them these different types of powers and this different type of appeal. But like I said, I just don't like tieflings. It's just personal opinion. All right, next is Halston. Halston is a wood elf druid. Wood elf is actually one of the best races to play the druid class, which means I probably should play a wood elf druid or maybe a half wood elf druid. But I don't know. I just, something about the half drow, like I said, just there's something neat about it, especially with the built-in spells. But either way, Halston so far from the base game, playing the early access, I like the character. I like his personality. He's a healer. He's a fellow druid. He is 100% going to be on my core team. Now, some people might be like, oh, but having multiple classes, like the same class multiple times on your team, is going to make for a balanced team. Actually, druids are so dynamic in their usage and how they can be frontline tanks and animal wild shape, or you can be backline spellcasters, or you can do control, or you can do healing. There's a whole bunch of different type of utility that druids have. So multiple druids on a team, I personally don't see as being unbalanced, and I also think it's going to fit with my character. Hey, it's a fellow druid. Let's group up and take care of this tadpole issue. So Halston apparently can join you in the full game, and I do like the character so far. He seems pretty cool. So I 100% expect him not only to be one of the companions I pick up, but he's going to be part of that core team, like I said, and probably a frontline tank. He seemed to have taken the bear form in the early access, so I'm assuming he's probably of the Circle of the Moon. I'm going to play Circle of the Land, so it's probably going to balance out really nicely. So yeah, he's definitely going to be one of my team members for sure. The only thing that throws me a little bit is I like that Larian Studios gives options, but apparently there are rumors that he can be romanced. Now, I don't know who... I'm probably always going to play a male, and I don't have an interest in romancing other men in the game. But the fact that apparently he will be in bear form for one of the first scenes, you know, if that's something you want, I guess it's good to give you the option. But I'm a little disturbed by that, just to be perfectly blunt and transparent. So I wish they wouldn't have added that to the game, but I don't have to ever see or play that scene. Again, you have choices and options. Do what's going to make you happy in the game, play what you want to play. But ignoring that piece, the character's still a neat character. All right. Mythara. So Mythara is a drow paladin. I like drow. There's something I like about drow. Drow are evil elves. And I know they're taking away the whole alignment thing. Doesn't matter. Drow are evil. All right. Their goddess, the Spider Queen herself, literally set up the matriarchal drow society to dominate and lie and twist and attack each other. And she pretty much enforces it. Drow are bad. And it's very rare that they'll break away. You have Dritz, who breaks away. He's a ranger, and he kind of goes to the surface and kind of becomes a pseudo-good guy. So there are those who break away from Drow society, and it does look like you do have both Lothsworn as well as Celandine or something, Drow, so you can choose. Even with the half-Drow character, you can choose your power set, but when you're a full drow, you can choose the type of full drow you are. So having that option's kind of cool. But Mythara, 100% evil. Like, apparently, and here's another spoiler for you, you have to attack and destroy the grove in order to even get her to join your party. No. That is not going to be on my first playthrough. I'm playing a druid. No. In future playthroughs, if I was playing an evil drow or an evil character, I might consider it, but I like the druid class so much, and I like the grove so much, I probably will never, ever have her on my team. She will probably be a full pass for any of my playthroughs, but the fact that she's an option is pretty awesome. Now, again, if you need a frontline character, Lysel and Karlach, so both of them could be your frontline fighters, so you don't necessarily need her. And if you're playing one yourself, you don't necessarily need her. But if you need a tank, Paladins do have that healing and bless utility. It's kind of like a weaker version of a cleric, in my opinion, or at least it used to be in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons and 3.0. I'm assuming 5e is going to be similar with that. So, I mean, it's someone you can consider, but I probably will not be having her as a companion myself. So, I've got mixed feelings about the character because I do like drow characters. Not for my gameplay. Next, we have Minsk. So Minsk, I remember him from both Baldur's Gate 1 and Baldur's Gate 2. And he had this little rodent. I could have sworn he called him Bob. He is a human ranger. He's pretty much crazy in my opinion, but because he is nature-based, being a ranger, he's going to fit real nice with Halston and my main human druid. So he is going to be on my team for sure. I don't know how long I have to wait to pick him up, but yeah. So your rangers are pretty much, they can summon beasts and they're kind of distant ranged fighters, or they're close finesse fighters. So you can do like double weapons or single finesse weapons. You can shoot bows from a distance, and you have that companion, so you have another character that can fight with you. Now, I remember him having this like gerbil hamster mouse thing, Bob or whatever, like I said. So I don't know if he's going to get another animal companion or if that counts as his animal companion. I can't remember because it's been a while since I played Baldur's Gate 1 or 2. But he's a ranger. He fits the whole aesthetic. And again, having this ranger utility for that range distance thing will fit, especially if Halston's my frontliner and then I've got my Circle of the Land Druid. Having a ranger in there I think will fit nicely. So if you want a ranged character that doesn't rely on spells or spell slots, even though rangers do get some spells, he has the bow. I mean, technically you'd have a fighter who is mostly proficient with ranged combat. You don't have to have a fighter be frontline attacking combat. You could have them shoot from a distance, but I think ranger would fit very nicely for your ranged role. So with some light magic as well. Next and last, definitely not least, Jahira. Jahira is a half-elf druid. Now, she is from both Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and I'll tell you right now, she was my favorite companion in Baldur's Gate 1 because she was a druid, because I like druids that much. She is, again, half-elf. She was a fighter druid, so she was actually a multi-class character back in Baldur's Gate 1. And she was also in Baldur's Gate 2 as well. She had a husband called Khalid. He died in Baldur's Gate 2, which is sad. You find his body while you're playing through the game. But Khalid and Jahira, who were, like I said, were married. They're both half-elves. They actually could join your party in Baldur's Gate 1. They would join it together. So I played both of them a lot. It was really sad to lose her husband, but she's just such a neat character. And again, another druid. So yes, I fully plan to have her on my team. My first playthrough, I'm going to have 3 druids with a ranger. That's my plan. I'm going to have Halston, Jahira, Minsk, and then my actual character, my druid. Now, again, I might consider swapping in or out on occasion with Gale. Maybe Karlach. I'm just not sure how I feel about that. Will I might pick up anyway. I don't know. But that's kind of where I'm thinking. That's where I'm leaning to for my first playthrough. But again, a druid character that can fill any sort of a niche because they're so dynamic in their play style. If she ends up being a fighter, she could easily be a frontline spellcaster, which is kind of a weird combination. But druids have a lot of control spells and things like that. So it's definitely someone that can be that utility all-around character on the team. And I think she can fit with any team. So she's going to be on many of my playthroughs because, like I said, I just like the character so much. She's just a really neat character. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. That is all of the companions that you can have in Baldur's Gate 3. And apparently you can hire hirelings as well. I actually want to try to figure out how to hire hirelings because, again, there's some characters I'm thinking of avoiding my first playthrough just to see what's different. I mean, I don't have to do all their backstories. I can mix it up however I want. With that being said, I'm kind of curious. What do you plan on doing your first playthrough? And which companions are you thinking taking as your core team? Are there certain companions you just don't like at all? Are there some that you really like and have to have on your team? Share your thoughts below in the comments and have fun playing Baldur's Gate 3 when it finally releases. I know I will.